Seraphine Vale had learned, very early in life, that silence was the safest place to live. She did not ask for things she could not have. She did not reach for people who would not reach back. She kept her eyes low, her voice soft, and her heart small enough to carry without anyone noticing its weight. In the Iron Vale pack, that was the only way an Omega survived, quietly, carefully, and without complaint. She was 22 years old the night everything changed. The blood moon ceremony happened once a year, on the night when the sky turned deep red and the air smelled like pine and rain. It was the most important night in the pack's calendar. It was the night when fate revealed fated mates, two souls chosen for each other by something older and wiser than any of them. Seraphine had waited for this night her entire life, not with excitement, but with the careful, guarded hope of someone who has been disappointed many times before. She wore a simple white dress. Her dark hair was brushed back. She stood at the edge of the stone circle with her hands folded in front of her and her chin slightly raised, the way Lena had taught her. "Look like you belong," Lena always said. "Even when they make you feel like you don't." The Alpha King arrived last, the way he always did. Kale Draven walked into the circle and the entire pack straightened. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that moved across a room the way a general moves across a battlefield, measuring, calculating, never resting. He wore no ceremony robes. He never did. He did not need them. His presence was enough. When the bond snapped into place, Seraphine felt it before she saw it. A warmth spread through her chest like sunlight after a long winter, and her eyes found his across the circle without any effort at all. For one single moment, Kale Draven looked at her with something she had never seen directed at her before, recognition. As if some part of him had been waiting for her too. Then the moment passed. She watched his jaw tighten. She watched his eyes grow cold. She watched the warmth in his expression close, like a window shutting against the wind. An alderman stepped close to his ear and whispered something. Kale's shoulders pulled back. And then he walked to the center of the circle, and he looked at her, really looked at her, and he said the words that she would carry in her chest for the next 3 years like a stone she could not put down. "I, Kale Draven, Alpha King of the 7 packs, reject you, Seraphine Vale, as my fated mate. You are not what this throne requires." The pack laughed. Some looked away. No one spoke up. The bond fracture was physical, a sharp, tearing pain that started in her chest and spread to her hands and knees. She did not cry. She had promised herself she would not cry. She lowered herself to the stone floor not out of weakness but because her legs made the decision for her. Through blurred eyes, she watched Kale turn his back. She waited for him to look over his shoulder. He did not look over his shoulder. By the time the ceremony ended, Seraphine had made a decision. She was not going to beg. She was not going to wait. She was not going to stay in a place that had never truly wanted her, hoping that someone would change their mind. She walked back to the small room she shared with no one, packed one bag, and placed her pack ring on the altar stone outside the gate. Not thrown. Placed. With both hands, like something she had finished with. She did not look back as she walked into the dark. The city of Ashen Falls sat at the edge of pack territory, close enough to the shifter world for rogues to breathe, far enough from the estate for Seraphine to think clearly for the first time in her life. She arrived with one bag, $40, and a bruised bond that ached like a bad tooth she could not stop pressing with her tongue. She found a small room above a laundry and took work wherever she could. She cleaned. She cooked. She carried boxes. She did not complain. Seraphine had never been afraid of hard work. What she had been afraid of was working hard and still being invisible. But here in Ashen Falls, no one knew she was an Omega. No one knew her rank or her history. She was simply a young woman who showed up early and stayed late, and people respected that in a way the pack never had. It was in the 4th month that she met Damon Vale. Damon was a rogue wolf, tall, quietly watchful, with the kind of steady energy that came from someone who had already survived whatever they were most afraid of. He ran a small private security firm out of a building on Meridian Street, and he had a reputation in the rogue community for being fair, honest, and completely without patience for cruelty. He offered her a job after she stopped a fight outside his office building by standing between 2 grown men and simply saying, very clearly, "That is enough." Both men had stopped. Neither of them could explain why. That is not a normal thing for an Omega to do, Damon told her afterward. I am aware, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. There is something in you that has not woken up yet. Would you like to find out what it is? She thought about the stone floor of the blood moon ceremony. She thought about the pack ring she had left behind. She thought about 3 years of keeping herself small so that someone else could feel tall. Yes, she said. I would. What followed was 2.5 years of the most difficult and most important work Seraphine had ever done. Damon did not simply train her to fight, though she learned that too. He trained her to lead. To speak with authority. To walk into a room and take up space without apology. He told her that power was not given, it was built, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. She believed him because she watched him live it. It was during this time that the Silver Aura appeared. It happened first during a meeting with 3 rogue pack leaders who had been arguing for weeks over border lines. Seraphine had sat quietly through an hour of the same circular argument, and then she set down her cup, looked at all 3 men, and said, "Here is what you are going to do." Her voice did not rise. She did not threaten or bargain. She simply laid out a solution so clear and so fair that the argument had nowhere left to go. All 3 men nodded. All 3 men agreed. None of them could explain afterward why they had felt so compelled to listen. Damon had seen the faint silver light that moved under her skin when she spoke. He said nothing about it that day. That night, he did a great deal of research. The Silver Aura, he told her the next morning, appears once in a generation, and only in an Omega. It is the ability to speak with a weight that even alphas cannot resist. It does not control people, it makes the truth unavoidable. He paused. Someone knew you had this. Someone was afraid of what it would make you. Seraphine sat with that for a long time. Then she started building. She called it the Ashen Network, a web of rogue wolves, half-bloods, and outcasts across 6 cities. People who had been pushed to the edges of the pack world and told they did not matter. She gave them structure. She gave them purpose. She gave them a seat at a table that had never had one. Within a year, the Ashen Network was the most organized rogue alliance the shifter world had ever seen. Outside the pack world, people began to speak of the Silver Sovereign, a woman who led without rank, commanded without force, and built something real out of nothing but people who had been told they were nothing. Inside the Iron Veil estate, Kale Draven was not sleeping. His wolf had been restless since the night of the blood moon, a deep, grinding restlessness that no amount of work or distance could quiet. He had told himself it was the stress of leadership. He had told himself the discomfort would pass. 3 years later, it had not passed. It had gotten worse. He threw himself into his work. He expanded pack trade agreements. He settled disputes between the northern clans. He did everything a good Alpha King was supposed to do, and he did it excellently, and none of it touched the hollow place in his chest that had been there since the night he turned his back on a woman in a white dress. He had not spoken her name aloud since that night. His most trusted advisor, a younger man named Ren, watched him carefully and said nothing for 2 years. In the 3rd year, Ren said, quietly, "You know what you did, don't you?" Kale did not answer. "I thought you were making a political decision," Ren said. "I think now you were making the worst mistake of your life." Kale still did not answer. But he did not argue, either. And that, Ren understood, was all the confirmation he needed. The Grand Assembly convened on a Tuesday in late autumn, in the neutral city of Vorel. It happened every 5 years, and it brought together every pack leader, every elder, and every allied faction in the shifter world. For the first time in the Assembly's history, rogue alliances had been granted observer seats. Seraphine arrived in silver, a long, clean coat, silver earrings, her hair pulled back. She wore no mask. She had considered it, and then decided against it. She was not hiding anymore. She took her seat at the observer table with 2 members of the Ashen Network beside her, and she looked at the room with clear, steady eyes. Kale entered from the east door, and the room responded the way it always did, with a collective straightening, a quiet that was closer to respect than fear. He was still exactly as powerful as she remembered. Perhaps more so. The years had not softened him. They had carved him, the way wind carves stone. His eyes moved across the room in that measuring way she remembered, and then they stopped. She felt it even from across the hall, the moment his gaze landed on her. She did not look away. She met his eyes for exactly 3 seconds, and then she looked back down at her papers, as calmly as if she were looking at the weather outside a window. Cale did not look away for a much longer time. His wolf had gone absolutely still inside him. Not calm, still. The way water goes still before something moves beneath it. Every instinct in him was pulling toward the woman in silver at the observer table, and he did not understand why, because the bond he had rejected was supposed to be closed, and yet every nerve in his body was behaving as if it were not closed at all, as if it were wide open and aching. When Seraphine spoke during the first session, the room quieted on its own. She did not raise her voice. She laid out the Ashen Network's proposal for rogue representation in pack law, clearly, logically, without drama. 3 pack leaders changed their position before she finished speaking. Cale watched her from his seat at the head of the table and felt something shift in his chest that he was not ready to name. That evening, Elder Maris, the old council member who had whispered in Cale's ear on the night of the blood moon, made a mistake. He pulled another elder aside in a corridor and said, far too loudly, that the Silver Sovereign needed to be removed from the assembly because her aura was too dangerous, that they had known about it before the rejection ceremony, that this had always been the reason. Lena, who had traveled from the Iron Veil pack on her own, heard every word. She recorded it on her phone. She sent it to Seraphine that night. Seraphine sat in her room and listened to the recording twice. Then she sat quietly for a while in the dark. She was not surprised. She had suspected, for some time, that the rejection had not been random, that someone had been afraid of her even before she had given them a reason to be. Knowing for certain was different from suspecting. Knowing for certain was a door opening onto something very wide. She slept well that night. She had been waiting for this door for a long time. The second morning, Cale found her alone in the corridor outside the East meeting room. He had not planned it. He had simply been walking, and she had been there, and his feet had made a decision his mind had not yet caught up with. I need to speak with you, he said. I know, she said, without stopping. He walked alongside her. I have been watching you since yesterday. I know that too. He stopped walking. She stopped a moment later and turned to face him. He looked at her, at the composure, at the stillness, at the quiet certainty in her expression, and something about her was so familiar that it reached into his chest and pulled. Who are you? He asked. His voice came out quieter than he intended. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, without any drama at all, she said, You already know. He did know. He had known since the moment his eyes found her in the Great Hall. He had not wanted to know, because knowing meant understanding the full size of what he had done. But the bond did not lie, and his wolf did not lie, and the hollow place in his chest that had been empty for 3 years was suddenly so loud he could barely breathe around it. Seraphine, he said. Her name came out like something he had been holding in his hands for a long time and was only now setting down. She tilted her head slightly. Her expression was not angry. It was not broken. It was something much more difficult to face than either of those, it was patient. The patience of someone who had already done every piece of their healing without him. You had your night on that stone floor, she said quietly. This is my assembly. Excuse me. She walked away, and he stood in the corridor and watched her go, and for the first time in 3 years, the Alpha King of the 7 packs did not know what to do. The third morning, Seraphine stood at the floor of the Grand Assembly and presented the recording. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform outrage. She simply played it, stated the facts clearly, and laid the evidence on the table the way someone lays down a completed hand of cards, calmly, with full confidence in what she is holding. The room erupted. 4 pack leaders called for Elder Maris to be removed. 2 others demanded an investigation into the rejection ceremony. The assembly floor became very loud very quickly. Cale sat at the head of the table and said nothing for a long time. He thought about the night of the blood moon. He thought about the elder's voice in his ear. He thought about the woman in the white dress who had lowered herself to the stone floor in pain and waited for him to turn around. He thought about 3 years of hollow work and sleepless nights and a wolf that grieved something it was not allowed to name. He stood up. The room quieted. He walked across the floor. People moved out of his way without being asked, the way they always did. He walked until he stood in front of Seraphine, and then he did something that made every person in the Grand Assembly hold their breath. He lowered himself to one knee. The Alpha King of the Seven Packs knelt on the stone floor of the Grand Assembly and looked up at the woman he had rejected 3 years ago, and he spoke without preparation, without a speech, without anything except the plain truth. I was used, he said. And I let myself be used, because I told myself that my throne mattered more than my conscience. I turned my back on you in front of every person who should have protected you, and I called it a decision. It was not a decision. It was a failure. My failure. Not yours. He held her gaze. I am not asking for forgiveness. I do not have that right. I am asking you to know, in front of every witness in this room, that I see you. That I should have always seen you. And that what was done to you was wrong, and I was part of it, and I am sorry. The room was so quiet that the sound of the autumn wind outside the windows was the only thing anyone could hear. Seraphine looked down at him. She had imagined this moment, in small, private ways, over the past 3 years. She had imagined feeling triumphant, or satisfied, or vindicated. She had not imagined feeling this, a quietness that had nothing to do with winning. She felt the broken bond shift in her chest, like a door that had been bricked over for a long time, the bricks cracking slightly, light coming through the edges. She did not take his hand. She did not tell him everything was forgiven. She was not there yet, and she had learned that pretending to be somewhere she was not was the first thing she had given up when she walked away from the pack. But she looked at him and she said, clearly enough for the room to hear, "Get up, Kale. We have work to do." Elder Maris was removed from his position before the end of the assembly. 3 other council members resigned. The investigation into the rejection ceremony was formally opened. The Grand Assembly voted unanimously to grant the Ashen Network full allied status within the 7 Packs, the first time in the history of their world that a rogue alliance had been given a permanent seat at the table. Seraphine was named its sovereign representative. Zara, the noblewoman the council had tried to position as Kale's chosen partner, came to find Seraphine on the last day of the assembly. She was younger than Seraphine had expected, and she looked tired in the way that people look tired when they have been carrying something they did not choose. I did not know the full truth, Zara said. I want you to know that. I would not have agreed to any of it if I had. Seraphine looked at her for a moment. I believe you, she said. And she did. She had met enough real enemies to recognize someone who was not one. She shook Zara's hand, and that was the beginning of something that would eventually become a quiet, unlikely friendship. In the weeks that followed, Kale did not chase Seraphine. He did not send grand gestures or dramatic letters. He did one thing, and he did it carefully. He sat down and wrote her a letter, not a love letter, not a plea. He wrote a list. Every moment over the past 3 years where he had felt the weight of what he had done. Every night his wolf would not settle. Every time he had caught himself wondering where she was. He wrote it honestly, without dressing it up, and he ended it with 2 sentences. I am not sending this because I expect anything. I am sending it because you deserve to know that I have not forgotten what I took from you. He did not ask for a response. 3 weeks later, a short note arrived at the Ironvale estate. Meet me at the east border of Ashen Falls. Come alone. Bring nothing except yourself. He drove 4 hours without stopping. She was standing at the border of the city when he arrived, in ordinary clothes, her silver coat, her hair loose. She looked like herself. Not like the Silver Sovereign. Not like the Omega who had stood on a stone floor in a white dress. Just herself, the person she had built, slowly and honestly, over 3 years. They walked the edge of the city together, and she talked. She told him about arriving with 1 bag and $40. She told him about Damon, and the security firm, and the first rogue leaders who had believed in the network before it was anything worth believing in. She told him about the silver aura, and the morning she understood what it meant. She told him, without any drama, what the rejection had cost her in the early days, the pain, the loneliness, the nights she had pressed both hands to her chest and breathed through it. He listened. He did not try to explain himself. He did not try to justify. When she finished speaking, he simply said, "Thank you for telling me." "I did not tell you for your sake," she said. "I told you for mine. I needed you to know what happened to me, so that neither of us is carrying a version of this story that is not true. He nodded. I understand that. They walked a while longer in the quiet. I am not ready to be where I was supposed to be 3 years ago, she said finally. I am not sure I will ever want the same things the bond originally promised. Too much has changed. I have changed. I know, he said. But I am willing, she said carefully, to find out who we are now. Not who fate said we should be. Who we actually are. Cale stopped walking. He turned to look at her in the low evening light, and something in his expression that had been held tight for 3 years released quietly, like a breath he had been holding since the blood moon. That, he said, is more than I deserve. Yes, she agreed. It is. She held his gaze for a moment, and then, very slightly, she smiled. It was not the guarded, careful smile of the girl who had learned to keep herself small. It was the smile of a woman who had built herself from nothing, who had earned every single thing she had, who stood on solid ground of her own making and knew exactly who she was. And it was the most powerful thing Cale Draven had ever seen. The bond between them did not return the way it had been broken, sudden and sharp and public. It returned the way all real things return after long absence, slowly, quietly, one small decision at a time. A conversation that ran longer than expected. A message sent without reason. A morning when she called him, not because she needed anything, but because she simply wanted to, and that wanting was enough. Seraphine Vale had learned, very early in life, that silence was the safest place to live. What she had not known then, what she understood completely now, was that the right kind of silence was not the silence of someone hiding. It was the silence of someone so sure of themselves that they did not need to fill the air with noise to prove they existed. She existed. She had always existed. It had simply taken being cast aside to make her understand just how much space she was actually meant to take up in the world.